Afternoon. I'm Spencer Rule of Sarity Partners and your workshop host today. I'm here to introduce you to the workshop leaders. This workshop is titled Leveraging Employee Ownership in ETA. I'd like to introduce you to Sean Tamba Matthew, shareholder at Stevens & Lee, Michael Palmieri, the new Associate Director at Ohio Employee Ownership Center, just as of yesterday. Big congrats. And Sean Wenger, CEO of Precision Communications. We appreciate you being here today. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Michael.
All right. Thank you very much. So, do we have? There it is. Okay. So I'll be moderating the discussion today between Sean and Sean. But just a little bit about myself. So I'm Mike Palmieri. I'm with the Ohio Employee Ownership Center. And we're a university-based outreach center. So we're based at Kent State University. And we do three things. One is succession planning for business owners. Do everything that any advisor who would kind of assist with that would. I think the added value that we bring is we have an expertise in sales to employees, so through ESOPs and other structures. We also have training and education that we do for existing employee-owned companies, both year-round programs as well as custom training for an individual company. And then we do research around the impact around employee ownership. So we're right down at Kent State, been around since '87, and it's always exciting to attend this symposium. Been here for the last 3 years. So I'm gonna pass it over to our first Sean Wenger. Can you give a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. Sean Wenger. I'm a partner with Promise One Companies, and day-to-day I lead an infrastructure company out of Oklahoma called Precision Communications. We are in the tower business. We support the local news stations around the country with their tall tower infrastructure. Also a board member of Promise Partners, which I think many people have heard that name over and over today.
Great. Can everyone hear me? No. Hello? 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 All right. We'll share a mic. There we go. All right. How about now? Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, I can hear myself now, too. Wow. All right. Anyways, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean Matthew. I am a shareholder at the law firm Stevens & Lee. And with our multidisciplinary team, which includes a FINRA licensed investment bank that our law firm owns, we go out to market and advise business owners and their companies, as well as a growing ecosystem of private funds and independent sponsors on transitions to employee ownership through an ESOP. It's a national practice. I'm based in suburban Philadelphia. I am, however, a native of Northeast Ohio, grew up in East Cleveland. And so it's great to be home, at least for a little bit of time today, before I have to head back to the kids and the family for Halloween. But excited to talk to you guys today about ESOP transitions, about Precision Communications, and about what we're seeing in the employee ownership space and the opportunity for a little bit more collaboration, or a lot more collaboration, with folks who want to do ETA.
Yeah. All right. So just to kind of get it started, I think we're going to start first with you, Sean. Well, this will be easy, right? I'll be saying a lot of with you, Sean, but just kind of your ETA entrepreneurship story, right? As we were kind of putting this together, we thought it was really interesting that the employee ownership world and the ETA world, in some sense, are kind of parallel ecosystems that are developing and oftentimes working with the same people. And I feel like by the end of this, we'll kind of see a concrete example of where the two have met. But before we get to where they met, tell us a little bit just about your ETA journey and how it led you to Precision Communications.
Yeah, terrific. So my ETA journey started actually here at Case. I finished the MBA program in 2003. See one of my fellow classmates back there. I won't call him out because time flies. It's been quite a while. But during, at the tail end of my MBA program, I had the opportunity to take a course with Professor Richard Osborne, who was one of the founders of Promise Partners, and really kind of illuminated this path of business ownership through acquisition. Going through the MBA program, my goal was to kind of get into a good company, join a Fortune 500 company, climb the ranks. Hopefully I was a young kid with a lot of, vigor. My goal was to, kind of climb that corporate ladder. And, I really didn't have a family background of entrepreneurship. That wasn't something we talked about at the dinner table. So, learning from Richard, kind of his premise was, 9 out of 10 startups fail. So that's a pretty risky proposition. But if you focus on the one that made it, there's a lot more sticking power there. You can pull some risk off the table. And, learning through the organization, there's just, you've got customers, you've got cash flows, you've got assets to loan against. There was truly a model that they could learn. Early on, I had a lot of, excitement for being a business owner, but I didn't have a lot of experience. So really, the first, 10 plus years of my career was really leveraging kind of the path that Promise Partners, laid out just in terms of, what is the experience that I needed to be successful on this path of business ownership. Early on, I kind of went directly from college, undergrad to grad school. I didn't have a lot of work experience. I joke my mom wouldn't even back me at that stage, but had the good fortune of coming out of Weatherhead, joining a Fortune 100 company, working with just a world-class leaders, learning in that environment, making mistakes in that environment, and really focused on, 3, kind of core skill sets in order to be backable. And that was kind of sales experience, operations experience, and finance experience, ultimately leading to P&L. So was able to achieve that. As a young leader, it's kind of hard to get P&L experience, kind of the chicken and the egg. They want people that are experienced. If you don't have experience, how do you get it? So I was, fortunate to kind of crack that code. But those skill sets ultimately, put me in a position to do what I'm doing today, which is business ownership. From that perspective, I also learned kind of where did I want to be on the continuum. Working for a big company, I had the opportunity to run large business units. I also had the opportunity to run small business units, and sometimes there was just as much stress in the small businesses as there was in the big. Sometimes in bigger businesses, you've just got momentum, you've got more customers. There's just a lot to. Sometimes it's easier. So through my journey of kind of crafting, what is the type of business that I wanted, I also, was reflecting on, do I want to do this alone and buy a small company that I can do myself, bootstrap, different vehicles like SBA, or do I have partners that maybe I can have a smaller piece of bigger pie, and as that bigger pie grows, obviously, there's a lot of value that's created. So ultimately, joined the group that I'm with, which is Promise One Companies, and that ultimately led to them funding a search that I led in 2019 to find Precision Communications, which we'll talk about today.
Yeah. So I was going to say, can you talk a little bit more about Precision Communications and just kind of what it's been like? So you said 2019 is when you led the search. I believe it was 2020 when you actually stepped in, but
yeah,
take us between 2020 and now.
Yeah, so there was so it's the search. There's a lot of folks here today that are looking at buying a business, doing a search. So had the opportunity to have that experience. I was someone that, I didn't want to have a 2-year search. I'm, aggressive, focused a lot just in terms of, the network and who are the folks that potentially could, help with deal flow. My background was running service organization. So that was, that was one lens that we're looking at, how can I find something that was within, my area of expertise. We had a certain size criteria that we were looking at. And, what we found is, number one, a lot of times, you're held captive to what are the deals that are available at the time. If you're in distribution and you're looking at a certain size and you want to be on the east side of Cleveland, there may be only a few fish that come through that net. So we were subject. There wasn't a lot of opportunity service businesses at that time in Northeast Ohio with the size that we were looking at. And so we started looking at, how do I cast maybe a bigger net? And I believe it was on a trip to, start looking at Cleveland or looking at Toledo and Youngstown and Cincinnati. And so I think I was driving back from Cincinnati, and in no disrespect to Cincinnati, but that is not a fun drive, Cleveland to Cincinnati. It's a pretty boring, if you guys have made that trip. And I'm like, man, I could fly to Chicago in like an hour. That seems like way better than this 4-hour one-way trip to Cincinnati. So at that moment, we said, okay, what are maybe some geographies we can look at that, we could get to, and, in a morning commute via plane. And as you do that, you bring in Chicago, you bring in Charlotte, you bring in Nashville, you bring in these markets, and you just cast a much bigger net. Another, kind of insight through that search that became really apparent is this is a really competitive process. There's, 300 people here today. I don't know how many, percentage are searchers. There's a lot of people that are looking for these businesses at the size range that we were looking at. We're butting up into private equity, and even some of these private equities, they've got, micro funds. When I first started at Promise Partners, you didn't see those folks at lower than $5 million in EBITDA. Now we've got some of the largest private equity companies that have micro funds that are going $1 million in EBITDA. You're showing up and like, oh, wow, you're here. So knowing about how do you stick out, right? How can I beat a strategic who has different math than me? How can I beat a private equity that has a much larger committed fund? One of the key areas that we honed in on is who are the folks that really care about their cultures? Who are these business owners that it's not just a job, it's just not money. These are maybe, businesses that have been around for generations. These are folks that truly care about their people. And that's where we honed in, because as an ETA entrepreneur, I need all of those folks. Right? We're not a competitor where I'm buying a company, I've got an accounting department, they've got an accounting department. Easy, we're just going to cut theirs, and there's efficiencies in the deal. We need all those folks. So I've looked for folks that resonated with. And so as we did the search, we found an amazing company in Oklahoma with an amazing owner, with an amazing culture. They had a faith-centered culture, which was important to me. And in the teaser, the broker had written that the owner shared that the culture of the new team was as important as the price to her. And we said, okay, this is someone we really need to talk with. And so that ultimately led to this acquisition, which was in March of 2020, March 16th, 2020. I don't know if anyone remembers what was happening at that time. The world was ending as we were going on and doing a large transaction. So the stars aligned, and it's been a really, really incredible experience.
Yeah, and then fast forward, right? And I guess in 2025, or you can put a date to it, but fast forward, and now you're looking to kind of step back, exit the business, and you decide to pursue an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, as that option. Can you talk a little bit through, and we'll have Sean weigh in on what the ESOP is and the details, but can you just talk generally about what attracted you to that as an exit option versus all the other options that may have been on the table?
For sure. So we closed on the ESOP 2.5 weeks ago, thanks to a lot of expertise with Sean and SES, and I think original conversations with the center at Kent State.
It was I think 2 years ago, the ETA conference that kind of started this all. Yeah. So this is a big loop being closed here.
Yeah. So prior to 2 years ago, ESOPs really weren't on the radar. Traditionally, our holding company, Promise One Companies, were buy and hold investors. We find really great companies with a moat. We put in really incredible leaders, and our goal is to kind of own that for the long term. As we looked at this particular business, and we look at just the dynamics of our partnerships, we've got folks that are kind of varying proximity to retirement. Some folks that are sooner, some folks that are later. We obviously look at exit plans for a business, and that could be 20 years out, that could be 10 years out. As we looked at this particular business, there were some really unique elements to this business. One is just a really strong culture. It's almost like a family. There are several family business members that are in this business, and it's really important for us to preserve this culture. And what would be vehicles that would allow us to do this? Another element is just a really unique talent. So our folks build and maintain structures that are 1,000 to 2,000 feet in the air. We recently built a tower that was 1,800 feet. So that is like putting the terminal tower on top of Key Tower. So this is just a really unique skill set. And in our particular industry, there's only about 150 people that have the skill set to do that. When we, for instance, put a new antenna on a tower for a news station, these antennas may be 100 feet tall. They may be 10 stories tall, weigh as much as 3 Chevy Suburbans, and we may be lifting them 300 feet taller than any building in the United States. So it's a very unique skill set, and there's only 150 people in the whole industry. So obviously our ability to grow is tied to having these technicians with this incredible skill set. Our ability to consistently grow is retaining this really hard to find. So as we look at ESOPs, it became a really valuable, potential strategy that, how can we retain and keep these amazing folks? As we learn, and Sean will talk about some of the benefits, post-close of what that means to, from a tax perspective for the new entity, really allowed us to, set, these folks up for long-term success, right? Generations, 10s, 20, 30 years of success. And so a lot of those kind of came together, and then it became an issue of timing. And we said, hey, and there's so many, Sean can talk, there's so many variations of it. That's the beauty of the ESOP. We opted to do 100% ESOP, so sell the entire company. We also, through the generosity of, some of my partners, we've got some of the partners in the room, decided to actually self-finance that. So not being contingent to a bank and putting additional stress on the business. We truly wanted to see the folks, succeed. It just gave a lot of autonomy to really set up this organization for success for many, many years. So to answer your question, it wasn't on our radar 2 years down the road as a result of coming to this conference, meeting great resources. We were able to bring that into focus and do something, truly extraordinary 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah, and just to comment a little bit on that is we speak with lots of business owners too, and I think one of the things, oftentimes, there's many areas that attract selling owners to an ESOP, but that legacy piece and that kind of keeping the continuity, keeping the culture together, amongst all the tax benefits that we'll probably talk about as well, really, really encourages folks. And I know earlier there was a panel about how deals fall apart, and the topic of legacy and its importance came up. And so again, it's like another point in which these two worlds, I think, kind of touch one another, and one could be the right fit. So moving on more to the technical questions, or maybe just technical is too scary of a word, right? More of kind of informational on what is an ESOP, right? So can you kind of walk us through what that is, explain generally how it works, just to give everyone here in the room a feel for it. One thing, unscientific poll, raise your hand if you heard of an ESOP before being here today. Okay, so great awareness, love it. Now let's see how much they know about it.
You earned your promotion, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, so great. Well, so what an ESOP is depends on who you are in relation to it. And so from a seller standpoint, right, it's a buyer of your company who will buy your company at fair market value. And the way that you define fair market value in the context of an ESOP is that the ESOP's a financial buyer. Think of a private equity firm making a platform acquisition. They're going to be, and the ESOP's going to be competitive with that buyer in the market. For the companies, the ESOP's a really fascinating and powerful tool. Most folks think of it only in the context of a succession plan and a retirement plan. But really for the company, it's a corporate finance tool that allows the company to transition the shares, transition ownership of the company from the legacy owners to the employees in a way that's highly tax advantaged. And we'll talk a little bit about the tax advantages that are used in the ESOP process. And it's also designed to ensure that the company, after it delevers from the ESOP transaction, because you're putting on leverage on the business to facilitate that transition of ownership from the individual owners to the employees through the ESOP, after you do that, you have a perpetual capital vehicle that you can use to scale and grow either through organic growth or inorganic growth. And there are a number of examples of that throughout the country. Here most relevantly is Davy Tree Experts. I think that's how they go by.
Yep.
Which is 100% ESOP owned and have grown, exceptionally well over the years through acquisition, leveraging their structure as a 100% ESOP-owned company, and providing real value to employee owners and executives throughout those years. And from the employee standpoint, it's a piece of the action. It's why I do this work. I always wanted to do mission-oriented, transactional legal work. I got a ton of help growing up, back in East Cleveland, and wanted to pay it forward. I thought about going into politics. I was disabused of that notion after working on a couple of campaigns, and given the state of affairs these days, regardless of what side of the spectrum you're on, I'm happy I made the decision to go into ESOPs. It's a much more fun space, and it's a space where you get to see Bill Cassidy talk about, who's a Republican senator from Louisiana, talk about how ESOPs are the place where Karl Marx and Adam Smith have a warm embrace, which is what he mentioned at the Aspen Institute Employee Ownership Ideas Forum back this spring. And the reason why you have such support, because you see the real value to employee owners throughout the country. When you see businesses like New Age Industries, which is a client of ours out in suburban Philadelphia that has 70 plus millionaires at a given time that work for them purely through the ESOP, right? And so it's a really powerful retention tool, wealth building tool for employees, adding value to communities, and get to that legacy piece, right? Because you get to keep the name on the door, you get to keep the culture, the values, and you're running your business effectively in a tax advantage context. So, and I know that there's a ton of research. Mike, you do a ton of research at the OAOC. I know that, and you guys do a really good job of advocating for employee ownership. I was kind of being tongue-in-cheek when I said, hey, you've actually earned your promotion there. But the OAOC has been around and has been a standard bearer for employee ownership and a model for other state centers throughout the country. And so would love for you to kind of just share some of the work that you do on the more academic side. It kind of hurts my brain. Some of the research stuff that you guys have been doing over the years, but it's produced some fascinating information about the real impact of the work.
Okay, so the moderator becomes the
Absolutely.
the speaker. Okay, fair enough. Well, so
Change your name to Sean.
yeah. Well, so just to keep it high level, right? A lot of the research on ESOPs can kind of be broken out into three levels. One's at the company level. So what happens to the company in terms of performance when they become an ESOP? And early on, there was a lot of concerns about a company taking on that much debt in the transaction itself. Also, they're obligated to pay out workers when they leave, right? There's an obligation to purchase those shares back. And so early research was really around performance. And what we know now, about 50 years of research behind us, is that the relationship between company performance and ESOPs, if they're, and again, this is the researcher in me always caveating, strongly suggests over 100 studies now have been looked at in kind of meta-analyses, is that company performance tends to do better, not worse. And when I say company performance, people have looked at sales growth, people have looked at job growth, productivity, measured a bunch of different ways. We know also we have some kind of quote-unquote natural experiments. So when things outside the business happen, and look at employee-owned companies and non-employee-owned companies. One of the better studies on that front was one that looked at companies through 1998 to 2010, I believe. And what that included was both the dot-com crash as well as the 2008 recession. And what they found was that employee-owned companies were a lot less likely to go out of business and a lot less likely to lay off their workforce, right? They're usually looking for some other way. Maybe they're reducing hours, but that gets back to the company performance piece in that they don't have to rehire and retrain, right? And so in some of the costs of being able, having be obligated to purchase those shares back are recuperated, and some in terms of the tenure, right? And all of that. From a worker standpoint, survey after survey now shows that they have much longer tenure. If you're an employee owner, you're less likely to report that you were laid off, half as likely to report that you were laid off in that same year than a similar a worker in a similar industry. I've also been found to have 2.5 to 3 times as much wealth as the average worker. It's kind of a reality check. The median retirement account balance for the average worker is 0 right now for retirement. And so to kind of put that in context, be able to go to a company that's providing you a piece of the success of the company is great to retain, but also to attract talent. And then the final piece, and this is where we probably are still working on getting more and more research, is the impacts to the local community. So they employee-owned companies tend to hire folks who are closer or local, not always, right? There's large firms like Davy Tree, they're all over the place. But there's these kind of community level impacts as well. And we're getting a lot of interest from economic development folks who are looking around business retention and expansion. And so that's just a few of them. I can go on and on forever, but for me, there's always that question. People, we hear the worker level statistics and say, oh, well, a company that's doing that much for their workers, they must be hurting financially as a company. And it's actually quite the opposite. There's this kind of virtuous cycle. The company makes a very real play to say we're investing in you. And in most cases, workers are turning around and saying, well, we're going to kind of give back the same way that you're investing in us. We'll invest in the company. And so you see lower call-out rates, less safety incidents. I mean, I can go down the entire list. The ESOP companies just tend to treat workers better and perform better. I'll stop because I'm a nerd and I can go on forever. But to kind of go back, right? We kind of heard your reason, Sean, of why the ESOP was attractive to you. But if you could just kind of maybe go a little bit deeper into what are some of the financial benefits or other things that may attract a business owner to the ESOP? Because you talked to quite a few, right, throughout the year. And so, yeah, can you kind of give us some stories around that?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the ESOP, as we mentioned before, it's a tax advantage vehicle, right? Because of the positive benefits to employees and because it's tied to a retirement plan. Part of those tax advantages are on the seller side, right? And so if you opt to sell at least 30% of your company to an ESOP and you're a C Corp, you get to elect what's called 1042 treatment. And so you basically take the proceeds from the sale of stock to the ESOP and reinvest them in stocks and bonds of U.S. operating companies. Works effectively like a like-kind exchange. When you make that reinvestment of your proceeds from the sale to an ESOP, you effectively defer the gain that the tax on the gain that you have at the sale for as long as you hold those securities. And so that's a real tax-paying advantage. And for business owners who are trying to weigh options between, well, should I sell to a third party if that third party might be a strategic and might be able to pay me a slightly higher valuation. There are circumstances in which the ESOP on a net basis, when you factor in the tax benefit, actually comes out to be the best economic value for the seller. And so that's a huge, huge benefit that a lot of sellers we see utilize. The other big tax benefit that's at play here and why it's attractive to sellers is that typically when you're selling 100% of your company, while you don't necessarily need to take all the purchase price proceeds back in the form of seller financing, you will oftentimes need to take at least some of it. Most of the banks that we work with on cap raise processes for our clients who are looking to do 100% ESOP transactions are willing to lend anywhere from 2 to 3 times EBITDA for these companies, and then have the rest of the transaction proceeds come in the form of seller financing. And the reason why banks are willing to and like ESOP transactions is because, when you're selling 100% of your company to an ESOP and it happens to be an S corporation, it effectively functions like a tax-exempt entity. That entity is not paying any corporate or state income taxes because its sole shareholder is a retirement plan. And so you have additional free cash flow that would ordinarily be going to shareholders for tax distributions that can be used to pay down the transaction indebtedness. And sellers who are sitting behind the banks, oftentimes, really like that process, because even though that might be a 10-year term on your seller financing, you're typically getting paid out in year 7, year 8, if not sooner, because of the ability to use the free cash flow to pay down that transaction indebtedness a lot sooner. Additionally, the seller financing has a structure and mechanism that effectively gives you a sort of second bite of the apple. Where most deals are structured with a form of cash interest on the subordinated financing, coupled with warrants that get you anywhere from 15 to 20% of the fully diluted equity value of the company, reflected in the warrants. That's designed to give the sellers an internal rate of return of somewhere between 10 to 12% on that seller financing. And so if you think about your investments in the market outside of the Magnificent Seven, we can't compete with that. No one can compete with that. But outside of the Mag 7, getting a 10 to 12% return on your investment in a company that in a company that's not paying any taxes anymore, is really appetizing for sellers who can be patient on getting that payout over time. And so those tax advantages are really appealing, especially when you couple it with that legacy component, right? Which is something that really appeals to a lot of our sellers who are going down the process of selling to an ESOP. And it also helps our ESOP-owned companies too. So we have a number of clients who are acquisitive ESOPs. I am actually on the board of a diversified ESOP holding company called Empowered Ventures. And the storytelling around employee ownership, and we'll talk about how this can, be a benefit in an ETA search when you're pairing it with employee ownership, actually results in a reduction in the valuation that you're going to have to pay out at, right? Because the sellers are truly concerned with that legacy component, much akin to what happened in the Precision transaction where they said, hey, look, purchase price is great, but legacy is equally important.
So we kind of, I gave the stats. You've now kind of filled in the lines in terms of the tax advantages. Sean, you've kind of talked about that culture piece and how it fit with you. I'll ask the hard question. What are the reasons why some business owners do not pursue an ESOP or look at it and say, this doesn't seem like it would fit for me? Sometimes I feel like there's just as much value in exploring those cases. So I'll put that to you. I mean, you
Sure.
talk to business owners every day, so.
Yeah, no. So essentially you've got two gaps that are barriers to really scaling, expanding employee ownership, especially through the ESOP model. One is a truth gap, which, getting to your nerd discussion, I'll sort of turn the arrows towards my fellow colleagues in the attorney space and the investment banking space. Nerds are not really good at pickup lines. And so they will often say, hey, I'm really smart. This is really complex. You need to talk to me. Now, that doesn't necessarily exude the confidence that a business owner wants to hear about a process of transitioning his or her own business. And so I think that's clouded a bit of the narrative around ESOPs and the structure and the process and the timing. Look, ESOP transactions, when you compare them to third-party sales, they're no more complex. Yes, you're probably seeing more parts of the process, but those parts of the process are happening in a third-party sale transaction anyway. And the part that you're seeing on the ESOP side, which is the financing side, whether it's seller financing, you're seeing all of that, or if you're doing a capital raise with the bank, the fact that you're shielded by that on the buyer side when you're selling to a third party, the trade-off there is the wonderful colonoscopy that you get on the due diligence process when you sell to a third party, which is just not at the same level in an ESOP transaction. And so, when you talk about, getting to a close and execution risk, You don't see that in a well-structured ESOP process. The process that we went through with Precision was going through the process of a transaction analysis, providing a roadmap, outlining structure options, minority or 100%, using the 1042 benefit, not using that, and creating a clear path forward on what structure to use, as well as providing valuation input there, so that you know what to expect. And look, this is not when you're selling to an ESOP, you got to hire a professional trustee. That trustee has to hire a valuation advisor. If you're working with a team that's not, being extremely aggressive, and there are bad actors everywhere, there are bad actors in the ESOP space too. But if you're working with a quality team, and there's a ton of quality teams out there, they can walk you through the process. They'll be able to tell you where value is going to land and walk you through that process and get you there. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is that people don't appreciate that, what's ESOPable is actually, $1 million of EBITDA and 20 to 25 employees and anything above that, right? And so there's a really wide range of companies out there that are ESOPable that assume that they can't do it because they probably talked to an advisor who said, hey, I need $3 or $4 or $5 million in EBITDA. They're telling you that because they have a certain minimum fee requirement. Now, Mike laughs because he knows who or whom I'm speaking about. But from our perspective, we're a mission-oriented bunch, and there are several others like us who are out there who are really passionate about this work, passionate about the impact of employee ownership, and will walk, companies, whether you have a 7-figure enterprise value or a 9-figure enterprise value, through the process of selling to an employee. So that's a truth gap piece. The exit gap piece is pretty simple. There are sellers who don't want to stick around for 7 to 10 years to get paid on the seller note. And there's sellers who, for whatever reason, want a lot more cash at closing, and that's not unreasonable. And so I think that's the other piece, right? Yeah. It's a timing piece. If you're looking to truly exit your business and not have to worry about getting paid out on your seller note, even with all the tax advantages, even though you get to engage your employees as owners, right, and increase performance that way. If you're looking to retire, hang out with the grandkids, and do that after a year or two without having any involvement in the business, the ESOP's not going to be the best path for you.
Yeah, right. I mean, so it could be just the kind of the company size. And like you said, it's sometimes overplayed how big the company needs to be. But then I think at that next level, it's, where the selling owner is, right? If they want to spend time with grandkids, or maybe they need that cash to finance some kind of plan, could be health, could be retirement related. It may not fit. So I know we're getting close here, and I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but this was kind of thinking about how ETA and employee ownership fit together, where employee ownership was when you were exiting a company that you had been part of acquiring. I want to pose the question as to whether or not the use of an ESOP can also play a role on the front end, maybe making you more of a credible proposition to a company that says culture is important. And maybe even it helps a bit with, and I think you alluded to this, the kind of capital stack that you're coming in with. So can you kind of walk through what those details may look like? And then I might want to have a follow-up of, does that sound right to you? If you had to go back thinking about your search, could the ESOP have played a role? So, yeah.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time over the last, quite frankly, since I've been alive, whiteboarding on employee ownership and trying to figure out ways to scale and grow it. Over the last 4 to 5 years, we've been working with a growing ecosystem of capital allocators who are raising funds to say, hey, let's close that exit gap for employee ownership. By leveraging institutional capital and investing them in what would typically be that seller financing piece of the ESOP transaction. In addition to that, you have other actors who are out there who are saying, hey, you know what? I've got a great relationship with this SBIC fund, or I know folks who are willing to deploy capital and use mezz debt to structure transactions. We're going to take an independent sponsor approach, right? Find maybe an ETA entrepreneur who says, hey, I want to buy a company I need some help figuring out some of the things on as it relates to the ESOP structure and how best to leverage it and grow the business. And taking the more independent sponsor ETA approach to acquisition, but having the play be that the ESOP is either the majority owner or the complete owner of the company, and getting a blend of synthetic equity, whether it's warrants or stock appreciation rights, which get you the economics that you would get in a traditional search or independent sponsor structure. And so we actually closed our first independent sponsor-led ESOP transaction. And now we have a janitorial services firm. It's got 1,000 employees. Seller got pretty much all cash at closing. Capital was provided by a fund that's EO focused. And you have a sponsor with real experience out there doing a bang-up job off the jump already, really scaling and growing that company in ways that the legacy business owner didn't have the appetite to, but wanted to make sure that the business was in good hands. We are actually working with an independent sponsor client right now with a veteran from the U.S. Army who's running a search fund process, and reached out to them to say, hey, I need some help in trying to find an acquisition. They found a target, and that target is now is in the process of being acquired, and that deal is going to close sometime next month. Knock on wood. It was initially going to be an SBA finance deal, but then government shutdowns happen, I guess. But what's amazing is that there's this, again, growing ecosystem of capital providers, and we found replacement capital to facilitate this transition. That searcher now, it becomes an employee owner in line with the rest of his employees, gets, economics that are akin to what he wanted to get as a searcher. And on top of it, it's less risky to him because he's got institutional backing and support. And so what excites me about, increasing the number of ESOPs from 250 a year, which I swear I've heard that number every single year.
Almost a decade.
For almost a decade. We would do 30 ESOP-related deals a year. It's shocking to me that it's still at 250, but we're really excited to see these deals that are in process with buyers who've hired a business broker or an investment bank and have them convert to employee ownership when that's not the intention at the front end. And so there's a real opportunity there to scale and grow that and marry that legacy piece that you talked to that is, really part of the ETA process and why it appeals to a lot of sellers, but also to bring your employees along for the ride to get them real value at the end of the day.
So just want to kind of allow you to comment there as a ETA entrepreneur yourself. Kind of hearing that, does that play well, and some thoughts, and then we'll use the remaining time for questions.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge for someone that's doing a search, that's looking for a business is how do you stick out? Why would this business owner sell to this Sean versus this Sean? And your ability to understand and articulate that is really critical. And so thinking about using ESOP as a strategy to stick out, I think that's a really unique strategy that one could use. And just thinking about there's so many different ways, and it really comes down to really understanding understanding the seller. Why are they selling? What are those motivations? What are they truly looking to solve for? Is it their legacy? Do they have a health issue? They're just tired? Do they want out of the business, or are there elements they would love to stay in the business that possible? And just knowing the creativity that you can have with this. It could be 100% ESOP. It could be a 50% ESOP. It could be 100% ESOP where the owner stays in the business as a highly compensated individual, and now they've got ownership in the ongoing entity. These are just really creative ways to stick out. or maybe it's, hey, we're gonna, I'm gonna help address these structural issues you have in your business, whether it's, hey, sell to me, we're gonna fix this customer concentration issue, we're gonna check, solve this, technology issue, right? These systems issues, and 5 years later, we're going to transition this back to the people you care most about, the people that have created your wealth over decades. And so there's so many different ways. So, just thinking about a strategy, this certainly could be a very differentiated strategy that would, my guess is, stick out. There's not, there's a lot of people in the next 2 rooms, like for the folks that wanted to apply this.
But they didn't come to this session.
They didn't,
so
yeah,
everyone
exactly.
here.
This certainly would be, a creative way to stick out. And in the end, to the people that are, selling it, I mean, you're creating, if anyone missed that, the new entities are federal tax-free. We spend a lot of money to the federal government, right? So those dollars now can go back to paying debt service. Once that debt service is paid off of, that's going back to this company, back to the employees. This is a really, vehicles that create a lot of cash that now, like, hey, where do we reinvent this, or where do we reinvest this? So there's truly a multiplier effect with this, and someone that has that vision on the front end potentially can have a really differentiated message.
All right, so thank you, and we're gonna open up to questions. We have one, okay. We have time for one question, I'm getting told. No questions. You guys did such a good job. People are in awe. I will just kind of finish off, just to give context for those. I know there was quite a few hands that went up that everyone knew what an ESOP was, but just so you know, there's around 6,500 ESOP plans here in the United States. Within that, there's around 14 million what we would call participants, right? So these are individuals who are in the ESOP. About 10.5 million of them are what we would call active participants. So what that means is 10.5 million are actively working at a company, accruing stock in their ESOP. The difference between that 10 and that 14, right, that 4 million, are individuals who've left or retired from the company and are now receiving distributions from the plan. So they're technically still in the plan. And I point that out only to say that sometimes you hear all these things about ESOPs and you think, oh my goodness, they must be like such a niche thing. And in some sense, it still is niche, but I think putting that in context allows you to see that it's more likely that a worker is a participant in an ESOP, at least in the private sector, than they are a member of a union. Right? So that kind of gives you some context in terms of how widespread ESOPs are in the broader economy. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sean and Sean. To show our appreciation for these three's time and insights today, the organization has made a donation on your behalf to Owners in Honor. So again, big thanks, and appreciate just your guys' time, and certainly your Sean's courage as an owner and selling to an ESOP. So congrats.